slides. Okay, that's good. Cool.
You have my presentation, all of the files.
Okay, a very good afternoon, all of you. So now, as you can see, we have started off our new leadership series, which is on blockchain, because blockchain is the new future, new opportunities. So what is there in the blockchain? So to solve that mystery, we have with us today the blockchain expert, Mr. Jai Singh Arun. So he is the senior program director with IBM. He is a blockchain expert, more than almost 2 decades of experience he has got. And also we have circulated the ebooks with you guys. So he is one of the renowned author for this book, as you can see, which is Blockchain for Businesses. And today we have an opportunity to listen from Mr. Arun that what is there in the blockchain beyond the Bitcoin. So may I please invite Arun on stage to take it further. Yes. Can we have a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen?
Well, thank you very much, and it's my pleasure and honor to be here and speaking in front of you. I have to stay here in this boundary. Okay, that's good. That helps me. And the flicker to change the slides. Is there? I can see them here. How do I see them? Well, thank you again, and it's my pleasure to be here, and thank you to Mr. Bhupesh and Mr. Ritin to invite me here. It's an opportunity to share with you that what blockchain technology is, because often it's very, very confused in people or even senior leaders who are running the businesses, and they often confuse Bitcoin as a blockchain technology. But I would say and share with you that how blockchain is different than just the Bitcoin. Bitcoin is just an application on this technology. So you have to understand those two aspects. But what I would like to share with you, as you guys are going to be future business leaders, and if you would like to use this technology in your business environments, what is blockchain in a nutshell, and how you can actually use this for your business purpose, what kind of industry applications and usage that you would like to have. So that's primarily the purpose of the talk today. And it was an honor to write the book also on the same topic. And the reason for writing the book was because we have talked to over 100 different CIOs and CTOs across different industries and across different businesses, and same kind of questions again and again from those same people. And then intent was to write this book to help answer those questions. So I'm not basically, it's an opportunity to promote the book, but I think the intent to share the knowledge, because many a times people have different thoughts, different kind of intentions with blockchain, and it may not be the suitable technology for all the use cases. So let's get started and talk about what blockchain is. So I would not belabor the point about who am I and what I do, but I think I do have privilege to work with many of the other industry leaders and in different organizations as such. But I think within last 3 years, I have been focusing on blockchain as primary technology. And in this, talk to several clients also in this space. You talk about many of the major banks, you can name many of them. And then also, as part of that journey, I have looked at how blockchain is transforming many of the industries, which I think people always be thinking that is cryptocurrency is the only use case for blockchain. But we have found many different use cases that bring a tremendous value to other businesses and industries as well. So that would be the discussion here. I don't know if can you guys see this? I know it's a little small, but can you guys see this? Okay. I'll talk about these 5 things in general. Hopefully that will help you in terms of understanding the business context, why blockchain should be used and what would be the value for us. Some of the market challenges, opportunities that we can drive with blockchain, and then obviously giving you a little bit of insights about technology. I'm not going to talk about the programming language. I'm not going to talk about the deep technical stuff, but at least giving you enough insights what blockchain is. And then some of the business models and governance, which is very, very important, why we don't see blockchain everywhere in every environment. Resources and investments that you need to put together if you, let's say you decide tomorrow that I need to use blockchain technology for my business, how should you get started? And then some of the specific business-centric examples and use cases that you should see. Does this sound good, or you want to add something that you haven't heard of, or you would like to add something to this agenda? Any suggestions? Okay, I think this seems good. So let's take a step back here. How many of you think blockchain is the technology that can make some changes in the or revolutionary changes in many of the industries? How many of you think that way? Okay, that's good. How about the blockchain beyond Bitcoin? How many of you think, what's the difference between blockchain as a cryptocurrency versus other use cases you think it would be used? Have you heard blockchain used beyond the cryptocurrency or Bitcoin sort of things? Have you ever heard of that thing? Do you guys understand there's two different things, Bitcoin and blockchain? We will explain that in general, what's that. But I think this is some of the things. People say that there's a lot of hype in the market, but what I say is there's a potential in this technology that can help many businesses. These things that people have been evaluating this market size data or the information that it will change the GDP or grow the GDP by 10%. How would it do that, right? There is an opportunity here. We talk about that banks will use 60%, 66% of banks will have at least one blockchain use case or being used in their primary environment. There's a lot of market opportunity in general, but there's this hype cycle that we talk about, right? So the hype cycle is that where blockchain technology is used, cryptocurrency and mining already over that hump of the hype cycle, but there are so many other things where blockchain technology can be used. So we have to think about this thing, blockchain for identity, blockchain for smart contract, blockchain for platform as a service, right? Blockchain for many of the other consensus algorithms. So there are multiple things that we can think through how blockchain can be used for. And I think I'll share with you some of the examples where we can use blockchain in real-time use cases and industry use cases. But I think let's get back to the basics. If you understand any business network in this world, there are a few things that we should know. What business network is, basically you have set of partners, participants in a network, which are suppliers, buyers. You have things like assets, which someone is transferring between party A and party B, right? Those are the assets. So if, let's say, if I'm sending money to somebody else, there's the money is an asset, which is transferred from me to the other party. So think about those simple terms in the business. Those are called assets. Assets could be different ways, but let's look at the wealth. How is wealth generated in a business network? You are exchanging the assets in between. Someone is giving the services, could be an asset. It could be a physical thing. Someone is selling car, buying house. All of those kind of things are assets which are transferred between one party to other party. That's how the wealth is generated. Imagine that there are multiple participants, big network. That's how wealth is generated. Markets could be public markets, private markets. Very simple term. Public markets, you think about, you go to grocery outside like hawkers market, fruit market, car auctions and those kind of things. Private market, which you don't see generally outside, that you can go out and buy things, which are basically supply chain and bonds and other things in financial services. So if we understand these basic things, transferring an asset in a business network generates the value. We all understand that, right? But there could be different types of assets. There could be a tangible asset, which you can touch and feel. There could be intangible assets which you don't touch and feel, like your patents or software code or other things, bonds, other type of things. Data is also an asset in today's environment we live. right? Data is the king, not money always, but data is the king now. Cash is one of the things which is called a particular asset which has anonymity, means there is no one's name written on it. If I have $5 bill and I give it to someone else, now it belongs to him. There's no name written that this particular bill or dollar bill associated with me or somebody else. So that's the understanding on assets. So you guys are good with business, network, assets? Good?
Cash and tangible, like tangible, or you can consider it like.
You can touch it, right? You have coins.
As you said that it's
Right.
not like for a particular person, it does not belong to a particular person.
Right. It does not belong to a particular person, but it is a tangible asset that you can transfer, but it's anonymous, right? There could be one of the things that you could have that you cannot touch and feel. So in cash you can, right, money you can touch and feel, right? But there could be internet money, which is, we are not going into the cryptocurrency, right? And Bitcoin. Bitcoin, if you ask, it's intangible in this sense, but it's anonymous as well. You can touch the Bitcoin, right? It's in computer somewhere, right? The code.
Make it tangible only, that things we can
Touch.
You are considering it under
Right.
that.
Yes.
Okay.
But there is a difference between the anonymous versus something that has identity associated with that. So car, you have your own car, you have your name on it, it's registered under your name. You have a house, there is a registry under your name with the house. But do you have a registry for 100 rupees under your name? No. So, but you can touch $100 or 100 rupees bill. So that's the difference. The other important aspect we need to understand is the ledger. What is ledger? Ledger is basically, if you have a business, every company manages this, right? If you have transferred an asset from you to somebody else, or you have received a particular asset from somebody else to you, you will make an entry in your asset, right? Very simple. So ledgers are basically keeping those records, those systems of record on a system. On a computer you can call it, or physical ledgers, right? The books that you may have seen in the old times that we used to keep these kind of ledgers, they are still, we keep those kind of things. So ledgers basically have those entries in there, but the transactions are basically when you have transferring one asset to other party, and when you have specific conditions met based on your agreement you have. Like for example, if I want to sell my car for $5,000, if somebody else has $5,000 and he wants to pay and buy my car, the agreement is met, now that car belongs to him. Very simple. So that transaction occurs, you can see those examples. And contract is again in between those parties. If these conditions meet, that I want to pay $5,000 or he wants to buy for $5,000, if those kind of conditions meet, that's basically the contract, how you write, right? So if a party A would like to buy it for some other amount, there's an asset involved in between, and you can transfer that asset between two parties with some conditions. That's basically a business agreement. So you call that as a contract, right? Contract between two parties. So we all understand that ledgers, contracts, assets, right? But what's the problem with that? So let's look at the business network example. If there are 4 parties involved, or let's say in this example 6 of them, if there are 6 parties involved in a business network, and there is one asset that's basically transferred from one party to other party, all 6 participants will manage their own ledger, make the entry that yes, I have received this $100 bill, it has come from this party, it has going to this party. All of those transactions are managed in their own ledgers. Why are they doing that? It's same transaction, maybe it's going from party A to party at the end, but it's going through all of those different hoops or hops, you can say. So that's one of the challenge that we see. It's very inefficient process in terms of it, everyone is managing their own ledger, it's expensive too. On the other hand, it could be vulnerable because you are trying to keep the data and information of all those transactions from different parties, and while that information could be vulnerable if someone is trying to access that from one party which is not secured enough. So these are the primary problems when we see in a business network, that everyone is trying to do for same transactions, doing those records, putting them in the ledgers. I don't know there's really a need for that. That's the basic problem that we are trying to see from blockchain as distributed ledger, which can be replicated across these parties that we looked at. Imagine there's the same transaction, same information replicated in 6 different places, right? So distributed means at 6 distributed places, but same information. Not everyone is calling the other party, hey, did you get the $100 in your account? Yes, I got it, check mark. You are not trying to do that, right? So it's completely different way that you are doing it automatically. You are doing directly in the ledger. It's the same ledger, common shared ledger across all 6 parties with the same transaction. So you are not trying to duplicate the entries. You are not trying to duplicate the ledgers across all the business networks. That's the key difference that how blockchain helps, because you are trying to bring trust and transparency in a multi-party transaction. So keep that in mind. If there is a need when you have multi-party transaction and you are looking for trust and transparency, blockchain is the solution for that problem. Blockchain is not a solution for every problem, so keep that in mind as well. Blockchain is a solution where you have multi-party transaction and looking for trust and transparency issues. Got it? So this is how we see, because blockchain has specific capabilities. I'll share with you what blockchain has core elements of it, but I think it provides, if you write a record on blockchain, you cannot erase it. There's immutability aspect. Every time you change something on it, there's additional added information added to the same record that someone has touched this transaction and here is the update. And that's why we call it blockchain. So every time a transaction is written, a block of information is added in the system. Anything further changes is added another block, and those blocks are chained together so that you have a full trail record of audit or other information. So that's why it's called blockchain. So you have to understand that this is immutable. Provenance aspect, you can track who touched when what. That's the provenance, right? And then you look at the finality, which is basically you can ensure that transaction has finalized, someone has agreed on those things, they have been captured in the system as well. And the consensus aspect is important, that when you work with multiple parties together, you have to make sure that everyone agrees that is this transaction is legitimate or right or not, right? For example, if someone says, I have deposited $100, but he doesn't have even money in his bank to transfer $100 to somebody else. So you have to validate that information that this guy has really $100 in his account that he's transferring to other bank. So you have to make sure that those transactions are validated and those transactions are legitimate. So that's the piece, is the consensus, right? So that's how blockchain helps. But many people say that we do have traditional databases. Why blockchain is different than traditional databases? Because we have seen you write something and I can share that with many other people. I can have multiple copies of my database. Isn't that the same thing? Answer is no, and here is why. Because you can say traditional databases, which means every database administrator can see what's written on the blockchain, or sorry, in the database, right? But in the blockchain, you do not have the same case. Even super users do not have access to the blockchain data. So they cannot see. If you haven't given permission to them, they cannot see it. That's the difference. Imagine that people say, I can do the same thing with distributed database. When you say in centralized database, you have one super user. Imagine you have multiple super users. Everyone can see it in that case, right? So if you want to ensure the security and authorization and control and all those things, there are multiple copies, more administrator for more distributed databases, then you have more worries associated with them. The last piece is that blockchain basically helps. You have to keep in mind when you have these parties which are not trusted. The purpose of blockchain is basically bring distrusted parties on a trusted network. That's the goal of blockchain, which is you have other parties which do not trust each other. How can you ensure that there is a trust can be established? So the technology help you because there's immutability aspect, that if you say something, this is true, this will remain truth. You cannot change it after that. So that's how you bring those trust elements in the blockchain technology. So that's the difference between traditional databases and blockchain. I already mentioned to you that Bitcoin is an application running on blockchain technology. Blockchain technology, an underlying foundation of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency applications, but it is not blockchain. So Bitcoin is not a blockchain. Blockchain is a technology underlying the Bitcoin as well as cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrency and Bitcoins are just an application running on this distributed ledger technology. This was the first application, so people often get confused. Oh, you are talking about blockchain. Yes, I know. It's a Bitcoin. It's a cryptocurrency. That's not the case. No, we are talking about the technology underneath that. So that's the difference here. And many a times people see the big difference in that it's from business perspective, that how many of you, if I say, or if your bank says that I would like to expose all of your transactions to the public and they can see everything what you do with your bank, would you let them do? Probably not, right? So that's the difference. Today, the businesses are not ready to have the anonymized transactions. In case of Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, everything everyone can see. It's permissionless, it's public network. So every transaction is posted there, anybody can see it. But that's not the case that we do business today. So that's the purpose of this whole talk today, that using this technology beyond Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies that we talk about. And the three fundamental differences that we see in Bitcoin application than any other application we can think of with blockchain. So we have to think about the assets. We talked about what assets are, right? Assets over cryptocurrencies. Physical assets that you can touch, intangible even assets that you can touch, identity associated assets, anonymized assets even. But cryptocurrency is not the cryptocurrency asset in the business cases. Identity over anonymity, just the example that we just discussed a few minutes back, that how many of you would like to have your account information shared with everyone? This much is my bank account, how much money I have, because your identity is associated with that, right? So, but although on the other hand, banks would like to see who made the transfer. They can't keep the transactions anonymized, right? They would like to know who transferred money to whom. So that's the important aspect that you need to look at, identity over anonymity. Third aspect is selective endorsement versus proof of work. How Bitcoins work is that someone has posted a transaction. There may be so many other companies who are trying to find the legitimacy of the transaction, that, oh, someone says my Bitcoin valued over this and I have posted the transaction. There is a proof of work piece which is called many computers trying to solve a business problem, finding out this particular currency and does it really hold that value. So there's a proof of work that someone has posted a transaction or trying to post a transaction. They do the proof of work. That's the language they use in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. But in case of other use cases which are not cryptocurrency use cases, we call the endorsement. So let's say there are 5 people in a network. Everyone says, I agree with this transaction. There's an endorsement from that entity or organization that yes, I allow this transaction to happen. Other entities will do the same. So that's the kind of endorsement you want to get. You want to get consensus from all the parties in the network to make sure that transaction is legitimate, right? So that's the difference that we don't do. There's endorsement versus the proof of work. There are so many different requirements, but we talked about assets, identity, and the endorsement. Those are the 3 different things that make the difference how you use the technology for Bitcoin, cryptocurrency versus rest of the other business use cases. Here are some of the disruptive elements that I personally think, and that's what I think we mentioned in the book as well, that blockchain is different than any other technology and why it is so. We talked about the transparency, which means I think you can share all of the records, information with all the participants in a network. So that's one aspect. Immutability, once you have written something, you can't erase it. Security, every transaction on blockchain is encrypted. Usually it doesn't happen in the databases. Yes, you can force the database to every transaction to encrypt, but it doesn't happen by default. In case of blockchain, every transaction is encrypted. Consensus, the other aspect, that every party or whoever has the authority to make consensus, they can consent and then make sure that transaction is legitimate. Smart contracts, these are the business agreements that you have put in a code, a computer code that's running. If let's say you want to sell a car for $50, as long as there's a buyer who is ready to pay for $50, transaction happens without you. Nobody is involved in between. Computer automatically does that transaction. That's the kind of thing that we are talking about, smart contracts. So these are the 5 different key elements that sometimes change the business that we do in day-to-day environments and remove some of the intermediaries in between. So I think we will talk about some of those, but these are very, very disruptive elements in terms of blockchain, how it can be used. We talk about the transformation, how blockchain can have or bring the transformation in many industry use cases. One is the trust model. I give an example of peer-to-peer. So if I have to send money to somebody else and I know that person and I trust that person, why do I have to go through bank? Very simple example, right? If I need to give $100 to you, why do I have to transfer that money from US to India through bank? I should be able to do it direct, right? That's one of the example is the trust-based model. Many of the peer-to-peer business models, you remove all the intermediaries from in between. You can talk about banks or anybody else. When you go get your credit cards, there's a company which is called credit bureaus. They track your record and history, that how much money you earn, how much money you spend, and they give a credit score. Have you paid your bills on time? Those kind of things. But imagine if you have your own information, controlling your information yourself, and you can share that information with the parties who you are trying to do business with. You don't have to bring the third parties in between, or you can remove the third parties altogether from your business. So that's the different aspect of the trust. Decentralized ways, because not most of the organizations trying to control the information and data that they gather. Oh, these are my customers, I protect them, I would like to do more business with them. That's the thinking by default. So we have to think those aspects, that there could be a decentralized nature of the information as well as the technology across those elements, but you have to think that how the system within the business network, the information are not residing at one company. The ledger is not owned by one company. We talked about distributed ledger technology, right? Ledger is not owned by one company. That's how we have to look at. Even organizations should be distributed in many times, because not that everyone is making their own decisions. They are using the technology to do something. Contracts are automatically being executed as long as the conditions are met. So they are not, the decision power is not residing with one authority within the business network. So even the authorities, so that's how the organization structures are distributed as well. So we have to think along those lines. But many times I think people think blockchain is a technology limitation. I can't use it because I cannot do more than 10,000 transactions per second today. But answer is not primarily it's not the technology problem. We can do the other things. There are computer science ways that you can do parallel computing, other things. But I think the bigger problem here is the business related problem, which is basically, I talked to Wells Fargo Bank and they said, I'm running 73 use cases with blockchain. And I said, why? And they said, we thought blockchain can be used for many of them. And then ultimately they were ended up using only 3. So that's one of the problem, that many people think that blockchain can be used and solve the world hunger, but it's not ready for everything. So you have to choose the scope very wisely, that how and what business outcome you would like to have, and what's the scope that you would like to achieve with your blockchain network. Governance becomes important challenge as well, because when you have multiple parties, you think that contracts can be automatically executed. Imagine there is no governance, no one party making the decision. So how do you manage that when there are so many parties involved in the transaction? So governance become more important. How do you operate that network? So I think those are the bigger challenges than just the technology. But then the motivation aspects, that people say, why should I join this business network? What's in it for me, right? So motivation is the other aspect, that if I join a particular business network using blockchain as underlying technology, what's the value for me, right? Do I get the transaction level revenue every time a transaction happens, or do I get a fee associated with the transaction, or do I get any other monetization using or participating in this network? So those are the other things that you have to think beyond the technological challenges that we all know, right? In terms of architecture, when we talk about, there's people talk about public blockchain, private blockchain. I'll get into the details of those. And there are some hybrid blockchain, but technology says, how do I ensure security and privacy? Someone says, you know, that there are these government regulations called GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, and I think telecom space also, how you manage, monitor, secure the individuals or your customers' data. So how do you protect them? So there are rules, regulations in every country related to that. People say, how do I have privacy of my data? If you say on blockchain I can keep everything and everyone can see it, what's the point? How could I keep the privacy on blockchain? So those are the other big concerns. Which algorithm should I use to encrypt my data, right? Because every transaction is encrypted on blockchain. Throughput and scalability. We talked about the latest technologies that we have could sustain only 10,000 transactions per second. Can I run real-time trading platform on blockchain? Answer is no, because you can't do that because technology is not ready for that. But there are multiple other use cases that we can use it for. So throughput, scalability, those are the challenges. Consensus algorithm, people use practical Byzantine fault-tolerant algorithm, PBTF, BTF, other things. So there are different protocols that people, how do I get the consensus in my business network? So there are multiple different protocols for that. So we have to understand those. Interoperability is biggest concern. Think of the days when we started internet. DARPA started the intranet first. Other organizations, universities, research institutes had their own intranets. And after that, they started to talk to each other, right? And that became the internet and the global thing. Imagine the same thing will happen with blockchain. There are companies who will be creating and forming public or private networks or consortium networks, and eventually those business networks will talk to each other at some point. And that's the phenomenon that we will see. And how do you interoperate with multiple different blockchain networks? Because if someone has used a different consensus algorithm, it may not be the same with the other technology. So we have to keep those kind of challenges in mind when we are thinking of choosing a technology, or in general using a technology for your business. These are the 4 building blocks that when you talk about blockchain, everyone should keep in their mind. What are the 4 key elements in blockchain, right? So one is shared ledger. We talked about distributed ledger. That's the same thing. Smart contracts, we already talked about that. These are the agreements, business contractual languages that you are putting them in code, and as long as conditions meet, automatically executed. That's the smart contract. Privacy, we talked about what kind of security you put in, how your transactions are encrypted. All of those elements are important from this perspective. Trust, how do you build trust, right? One of the other things that we discussed is that how the transactions are being confirmed, endorsed by all the participants in the network. Who has the authority to do that? So that's the aspect that you build the trust, as long as those participants are doing the right thing in your business network. This is an eye chart, hard to read all of them, but I wanted to show you that there are multiple flavors of distributed ledger technology, blockchain technologies. But the 2 predominant one in the market you would see, they're called Hyperledger, other one is called Ethereum. And there are multiple forks or flavors within each of them. There's Hyperledger Fabric, there's Sawtooth one from Intel, Pantheon, JPMC, and others that have started, Quorum, Corda. So those are multiple different flavors, but they are all blockchain technologies that you can think of. They have different way of starting and building these technologies in first place, because some wanted to start with financial use cases, someone still focusing on the cryptocurrency and virtual currency use cases. Some are far mature than others. Some are using different protocols that we talked about here in the governance structure, as well as the consensus mechanism you see. There are different protocols being used to make the consensus. So, but they are trying to achieve different goals with their business requirements. But I wanted to share with you that there are different technologies. If you hear those names, Pantheon, Quorum, Corda, or all of those, they are part of blockchain DLT in nutshell. When you talk about the enterprise blockchain, or basically blockchain for business use cases, it's one of the area that we need to look at. There are three things that you see: application on top, how your network is running, and then you have to have a trust system built underneath, because it's all about trust in case of blockchain. Transactions that need the trust, and how you build that trust using a fabric underneath. And that's basically the technology platform underneath you see with what is called here blockchain fabric. I'll get into the details of those, but let's look at the types of blockchain that people talk about. You will say, I have heard that people say it's public blockchain, private blockchain, hybrid blockchain, federated blockchain. What does it mean? Which one should I use, and what's the difference between all of them? I'll start with the private one, where you see that there is a party who has built a network, and only the people or member in that network can make the decisions, can see the transactions, and it's not open to public. There are different concepts that we call trusted peering, means peers know each other and they establish trust between them. That's how the trusted peering concept in the private blockchain is. Permissionless, where anybody can join the network. It's open network, right? For example, if you join LinkedIn, Facebook, those kind of things, if I would call them, they are not blockchain networks, but imagine those are network of people. You can create your profile and join Facebook, right? That's an open network in this sense. So that kind of public network, right? There's permission there, but there are permissionless networks where you can see anybody puts a transaction and everybody can see it and it's open, right? In case of private, it could be permission or permissionless as well, but within the network, small. Hybrid is where you have combination of public and private together. So there are few capabilities that you want to keep public, and some you want to keep private for a business reason, because let's say I have a sensitive business data, I cannot share with everyone in my network because of governance and regulation or compliance requirements, but I can share only some. And that may be a case where you have something private but something public as part of the decision making. Federated is the other one, where you have multiple different types of business networks and talking to each other, and those blockchains in general. This is one of the layout. If you will say blockchain for business platform, what should I look from all the way, what's the stack looks like, right? So all the way something, a hardware underneath, you have to have a blockchain fabric infrastructure. We talked about the 4 assets, right? The smart contracts, the ledgers, the privacy, security, all of those things are embedded into the second layer from the bottom. Okay, so this is called ledger. Crypto, which is basically cryptographic algorithm to secure your transactions, encryptions, management around all of the transactions that you have. And then you have this consensus layer, that's basically the trust system on blockchain, which are the different languages or different protocols that they use, PBTF, BFT, and all of those are the names that how do you build the consensus across the business network. On top of that, you write the chain code. Chain code is, in nutshell, it's a smart contract. So how do you write a computer code for a business agreement? So that's the chain code right up there. And there may be applications on top of that based on your business use case. How will users use that? So that looks like an enterprise platform stack, that if you think what blockchain should be looking at altogether. Here's an example of just for the infrastructure parts. If I have a mortgage payment application, there would be a partner involved, there would be some conditional contracts involved, there should be security associated with that, identity associated with that. So those kind of elements that we have to look through. Here are some essential elements of the enterprise blockchain that we talked about. Identity, ensuring the transaction that who is transferring a particular asset from party A to party B, right? There's set of tokenization. So I'll give you an example that I was talking to Federal Reserve Bank in US. They mentioned that how many of you know ACH transactions? The money that you send from your, yeah. Yes. So those kind of things that you do, transfer money from one account to other account or one party to other party, you can do on internet using your debit cards and other things, and it happens quickly, but behind the scene it doesn't happen quickly. It still takes 12 to 24 hours. What they do is they match your bank account number, your bank's ABA routing number, your personal identity information that's associated with your account. If you have given your driver's license, passport, Aadhaar card, everything associated with that transaction, they tally and compare with the other banks next day. If those things are matched, then only that transaction is confirmed between the banks. Although you might see that it's done instantly on your app or your credit card or other places, but it doesn't happen quickly. So the reason that I was sharing, that's one of the things that Federal Reserve Bank was thinking, that would there be a way that we can, instead of sharing all the information about your name, address, passport number, other things, ABA routing, banking number, I can tokenize that information, give a token with that, not necessarily having all the information in that, but in a cryptographic form that it's a hash or some other information which is not easily readable, right? I would use that to exchange the information. That way my transactions can be faster and I would not have to share all the information with everyone. So that's one of the example that we see, assets tokenization. So how, and even what other aspect is that how can you represent physical assets into a digital asset. Special example of diamonds. If diamonds coming from a gems mine, how do you ensure that it's the authentic diamond that has come from all the way from that gems mine to the Gemological Institute, the guy who is transferring it in the plane or ship or in the truck, going from there to a jeweler to someone who is buying it. How do you ensure the legitimacy and authenticity of that particular diamond? That's one of the things. So what we can do is basically we can take a high resolution image of a diamond that is taken from the mine, and we can have a cryptographic image of that, and we can, every time it goes from multiple parties, we can take that image again and compare if it's the same thing or not, right? So that's the other way that you can ensure the authenticity of those things, and that's where I think physical to digital. So we have converted the physical, which is the diamond, and taken its high resolution image, which was in cryptographically encrypted token of that. That's basically moving multiple parties, and you can tally and compare that. So those aspects, but then other things we talked about, how governance is important, because in a business network, if you are having multiple different parties and nobody is having the authority to make a decision, but it's a team making the decision, how do you ensure the governance across them? So it's very, very important aspect to that. There are different business models also with blockchain. As I mentioned, if I do the peer-to-peer transaction, I don't need banks in between, right? So there are different type of business models also emerging with blockchain, so we need to keep that in mind. And then the security by design has to be in there. So not what algorithms I use from security perspective, cryptography perspective, and all of those. I can name different industry use cases in each of them. Do you, anybody has particular preference or things that you think how and I could see blockchain can be used in that example? Look at this list and raise your hand and ask me, give me an example in that industry. Yes? I see.
What is legal and
Right. Okay. So as I mentioned that there is a concept called smart contract, right? We discussed few minutes back smart contract, right? You understand smart contract? What is smart contract? Anybody can answer? I think you all know, right? But you don't want to answer. Is that right? Okay, let me repeat that. So smart contract is again a business agreement. If conditions are met, they are automatically executed, right? You know that? Okay. What do we do? Usually, why do we need lawyers? Why do we need lawyers? Right, because there are two parties who do not trust each other, and you need somebody else in between to write a contract or agreement that if you do this, I agree to this, if you do this, I agree to this, right? That's why I need a third party, legal underwriter, whoever you call them, but that's why we need them, right? But in case of blockchain, there could be a way, so you have to look at from two different perspectives. Sometimes they are not needed. You can remove those intermediaries. But in case they are there, then how do you deal with them in the case that what business you are driving and what use case you have in place? So if you can give me an example that what particular business case or basically why this legal team was involved, I can help you. But in case of legal where we would use blockchain is basically typing about or writing about all the special contracts which are very, very complex, multiple parties involved in them, very, very difficult to get an agreement on disputes. I think it's very good use case for those. We talked about blockchain. Where can we use blockchain for? When you have multi-party transaction and you need trust and transparency, right? So that's the purpose of blockchain, that how we can use. So in case of legal, I can imagine multiple use cases like that, right? Where you would use, if you are writing a business contract, let's say I have a business which requires 4 parties in between. Rather than having a lawyer in between, maybe my smart contract can do the same job. If those parties agree and they read the smart contract, agree and sign on it, yes, I remove the lawyer from my equation, right? That's the kind of use cases that we can imagine with blockchain.
So this the lawyer guy, you were saying that through bitcoins some transaction happened. Then the guy who took the bitcoin and promised that he would give some product, they were sitting in Taj and then he fled from saying that I want to go to washroom, and then he fled. So those kind of cases he fights. But
Right. So yes, so he is fighting against the problem which should not be happening, right?
Yeah, but blockchain, there is no glitch in the blockchain system for which he is fighting. Right. So there is no problem with blockchain. So I don't understand that why blockchain lawyers. And now I saw that there's this use case of legal.
Right.
So that's why I was asking that how.
No, absolutely, very good question. So that's how I think we titled today's session, "Blockchain Beyond Bitcoin," right? That's the purpose, because and that's one of the reasons. How many of you own Bitcoin or have bought Bitcoin? Anyone in this room? Okay, that's very good. How many of you think you will make $1 million with that? Very good. Okay, it could happen, right? But there are many challenges. That's why I think we are discussing the governance, the regulation, that governments are not ready to accept the global virtual currency as of now, right? Because they know that their value of their currency will be demoted. That's one of the things, that if there is a global currency, how would you know that dollar is higher than, because there is no dollar, right? There's $1, global dollar. We can imagine that's the virtual currency. So there is a big fear, losing power, losing control, which I think beyond many of the businesses' imagination. So it's completely different aspect to look at how and why cryptocurrencies are not where they should be. We are fighting against the systems, because we are trying to say this technology can bring trust, but we don't want to bring trust. That's the reason, right? We want to live how we are. And if we live in trusted society, I have very good example of digital identity. Why do the heck we need passport, driver's license, so many other things, right? Wherever we go, if I go to airport, traveling, I have to show a passport. If I'm just traveling here, I need to show a driver's license to. If I'm going to bank, they ask me my bank or credit history. And identity is not defined today by one element, right? You think it's my name, address, it's not thing. Like there are so many things, my passport, driver's license, work history, financial history, my social profile, LinkedIn, where I work, what I do, so many things associated with that. And it's not owned by one entity, right? There are multiple entities keep my identity in general. So I think that's one of, if we live in a trusted society, why do I need to show my badge if I go somewhere? Why do I need to do, if they know who am I should not be doing all of those things. But we don't live in a trusted society. We are trying to bring trust using some technology in some places where we can do. And that's where I think we have to find those places where we can do. Governments can be, or their corruption can be exposed. That's why they don't want to bring blockchain into every business transaction. But there are governments who are absolutely looking for that. Dubai has announced that by 2020, all government records will be on blockchain. Estonia, the smallest country in Africa, is saying that they are using blockchain for their government citizen services. Imagine our Aadhaar card will be running on blockchain in future. Those things could happen, right? So those are the kind of things that we could see in future, but some of them are already happening. Right? Does that answer your question, or it does not? We can use, so the question that he's fighting for a problem which is the traditional problem. Someone said he did money transactions and that did not happen. So he's fighting with the normal status quo. So I don't have answer for him, but I have answer that I can eliminate him if he uses blockchain in different manner, right? Okay. So we talked about the government. Supply chain is one of the best use case for blockchain. And the reason for that is going back to the same phenomenon we talked about. Multi-party transaction, looking for trust and transparency, right? That's where I think supply chain is usually that kind of use case. Energy, now you might have been seeing that energy is traded between multiple parties, distributed between different vendors. But now we use solar energy, we use some other energy, right? So how do you have the multiple credits for different type of energies, even in the same house or same business? How do you ensure the trust and transparency in them? So some of the use cases related to that. Food, how do you ensure that this particular apple has come from Kashmir or not when you buy it? The seller can say, oh yes, this apple has come from Kashmir. How would you say it has come? So how would you fight with those counterfeit and then authenticity issues? So there's a food safety, food provenance, food supply chain use cases associated with that. Retail, you have multiple use cases in retail as well. Even Walmart is working with us in terms of how when they get the different kind of products, you can say it's related to food, but the retail supply chain altogether is one of the example there, that when they buy different products or produces from different countries, how do you ensure that they are coming from right parties and have gone through the right vendors. Healthcare, we have multiple things like, I usually give an example, the healthcare insurance ones. There is a cancer patient who is looking for chemotherapy, and usually the process takes 2 to 3 weeks to get his insurance approval. But if it's the same person, you have a policy with someone, there is a doctor involved, some other parties involved, it's one transaction, one person. If it's true, if this person has the policy, if this person has paid for policy, why do the heck you need 3 weeks? Should be in 3 seconds. So that's the kind of the example that we can bring with blockchain. If all those parties agree, insurance, medical provider, doctors, third parties, you, that yes, I can use this, use blockchain, and you can do, instead of 3 weeks, you can do in 3 seconds. That's the kind of thing that you can do. Insurance example, same, claim processing and other things. So it can happen those. Travel and hospitality, we have an example with, I'll share with you the details of supply chain in terms of the transportation. But in education, I gave you an example of, especially, I was talking to Rwanda government in Africa. They have K through 12 education system, and every city or province or state is fighting for more money from government. So what they do is basically they show fake information to government showing that my students' grades are not good. I need more money for my school. So the government is thinking of bringing blockchain-based K through 12 certification, like as you have your grade system. They are put on blockchain, so they cannot be tamper-proofed and nobody can remove them. It's immutable record, right? So they are using for K through 12 systems, putting all the information on blockchain so that they cannot fake the system. So those are the kind of other use cases in education and government that we can look at. Let's get back to I think some say that how can I start the blockchain and what kind of networks I can build. So there are founder-led network, there's consortium network, there's joint venture network or business ecosystem altogether. So those are different ones if you look at. Founder-led network is one that there's one company, they come up with an idea and say, I can use blockchain and here are other parties can work with me and my business partner can come along later, but I have to start this network. Maybe they have more authority, they have more control, and they think they can build this network. So that's how they can start that network initially, but they can invite other participants to join later. The consortium is where they think that my business works, I'm not the sole proprietary in this case to make the decisions. So I have to use other parties, invite other parties and make the business decisions. So that's how you use the consortium network in that case. Joint venture network where you have two parties and say, hey, we found a business, we can jointly work together and start a new business or new network that's based on blockchain, and we can invite other people if needed later. Business ecosystem is basically collection of the consortium. So for example, if there's a supply chain aspect, but there's a transportation company involved in that, there's the bank financial services involved in that, there are a couple of other industries involved, industries can be involved, and those are consortium use cases can be worked together. Some of the details, I know it's too many for you in a one day and it's 1 hour session, but you have to think of permission versus the permissionless. So you can think of private blockchain versus public blockchain. So that's the difference between. So they have how you implement them, how do you govern them, what kind of protocols you use in terms of making the decision, how the structure is centralized or decentralized, how the authority works in those cases. So those things determine that is it going to be public or private use case, or is it hybrid that I need to build. But one of the other thing is that governance is most important aspect in this case. So when business networks work, I think they agree on some of the basic rules and regulations, right? That if these things are done, yes, our business will function like this. So governance is more important thing, that if you are running a business network, how do I make sure what members should participate, what should not come, what kind of access they should have, what they should not be seeing, right? So those kind of important things. I'll give you an example here to explain this point is that let's say if you are in a supply chain, there are multiple parties involved in that. Not every party would like to see all the details of the transaction. They might be just looking for one information and you just want to show them that particular information, not everything. So members, how do you manage those members in the network? Technology is the other thing, what technology we use, right? Permission, private or other security related things. Business network in terms of how the operations are done, how the services can be shared in a business network, how do we incentivize the people are on the network, right? Because not everybody would like to be motivated that, yes, I want to join your network, but what's the value for them, right? Discussion we had before. So what incentives, what kind of compliance regulations and rules that we have to think of those. These are some of the checklists there based on all of those three of them, business, network, and membership one. But here's the other thing that we need to look at. When we talk about governance, how the organizations will be changed as well. They will not remain the same organization like they were operating before. For example, there could be still centralized, if there's a founder-led network, they have the authority and control, they can still do the same kind of things that they were doing. There could be some things that can be decentralized. In the case where you would see the decisions are not made at one place. Let's say I'm part of a business, but I do have a specialty in one part of the business, so I have the control over that, but the other participant has the capability to do or specialty in a special other area, so they have the control over that. So you actually decentralize some of the functions in a network, that not everything can be done by one person. There's hybrid piece where you have mix of both. So some things can be done in centralized, that I say consensus can be made for this transaction if these things happen. That's your central policy, but there's some policies can be distributed to other parties in the network. So that's how the hybrid one is. People say that what kind of role I can play in a business network or blockchain based business network. They can be in any of those roles, depending. Founder who has started the business network, member you are joining existing network, operator, someone could be operating the network but not participating in the network at all. Some of them could be users, and when members could be also part of a consortium network. So those are the different types of roles that they can play. And when you build a team for blockchain based business network or solution that you are driving, you have to think multiple aspects. It's not that I need a cryptographer, I need a blockchain architect, I need an application writer. All of those things are important, but you have to, before you think of those roles, you have to think through what kind of network will I be building, what kind of enterprise I would have, and what kind of network that I need to build, right? Infrastructure associated with that, security, other things related to technology. Is the scope allowing me to have 10,000 members or 100,000 and those things? So does the scope allow me for my business to need what kind of things? So there are multiple aspects beyond just the team or naming few that kind of roles required to make the business. Here's one of the example I would like to show it to you, is that when I was analyzing the first use case for blockchain supply chain, that was very good example in terms of this. You see there's a supplier here and the buyer. Very simple example I'll give you. A Toys R Us in China, sorry, in US, and a toys manufacturer in China. The supplier is in China, the buyer is in US. You see there are so many boxes here. I know you can't read all of them, but there is a truck company which takes from manufacturing supply side to the warehouse, warehouse to the port authority, it goes through the customs, it goes through a ship or plane or something like that. Happens the same thing on the other side, ports, customs, truck company, freight forwarders, what we call, and then goes to warehouse, distribution centers. Right? I'm sending toys from China to US. It's one transaction. There are 127 different documents that run across this transaction. 127 different documents across this simple transaction from one party to other party. Why does that happen? I don't know if the guy who is making the toys in China will be able to supply my toys on time with the money I have given to him. I don't have trust. Other side, the US Toys R Us would say, how would I trust him that I have delivered to him these toys and I would get my money for the delivery? I don't trust him. So there is this distrust in between these two parties. So what we are trying to do is bring trust in between those, and we have these additional banks involved here on this side and this side. The bank issues a letter of credit on this side. There's other bank called advising bank on the other side. That's how these banks work together, because banks take the guarantee that if you do not receive money from this, I will pay you. That's how these two banks are involved in between. So there is a letter of credit process. Sometimes these papers are actually sent by courier from one place to other place. So that's the other aspect as well. So you have to look at 127 different documents. Half of them you can imagine, if you are saying that maybe digitized, others are not even digitized. So think of that problem altogether. Imagine I can replace 127 documents with one document. One single smart contract across all of these parties here. If supplier says, my parts are in this truck, check mark, on the transaction. An event goes to the trucking company, they will pick it up. As soon as they pick up, they do check mark, I picked up, I delivered it to port, whatever is that. So they can do that, but it's a single transaction that's running across multiple parties. Events are triggered, they take an action, post the transaction, that's how it works. Right. So if it's the same thing, everyone can take their turn and take their actions and do that. Why do you need like so many bill of lading? Freight forwarders have that, copies of bills of lade, which when you have these things transferred, they work like that. So supply chain is the best use case that you can explain how blockchain can help in general, because these parties were not trusting each other, but also at the other hand, you don't have to deal with 127 different documents. Right? People say that how can I monetize on my blockchain network? So there are multiple ways that people talk about. There are token-based models. They generate, you may have heard the terms like ICO, right? How many of you have heard ICOs? Yeah, initial coin offering. So they offer these tokens, which are basically, you can call it stocks in general, in a virtual form, like that. So these are the tokens in general, but there are operations fees involved in some of them. You have token as a medium of exchange, so they share the token. So if you are part of my network, the value is given in tokens, right? There's asset pair trading, where basically if I'm doing peer-to-peer network, what margins do we get on a particular transaction, we share them. Commercialization of protocols, that people write their own distributed ledger protocols and they share that. And they want to monetize that everything happens on your technology. You want to charge fee on them and receive the different monetization ways. So there are different ways that how you can monetize on that. But basically the key is that if your network size grows, like it's basic phenomenon, that transactions will be improved, and then you will have the big business impact from trust and transparency perspective. Financial model is one of the important things that when we talk about the blockchain, it's not about that you can just build a business. You have to think through, because there are so many risks involved in terms of building a business network, because who is making all those decisions when you are trying to put together a business network related to finance. I will give you a little bit of more details here, is that as you do investments, you have to look at all of the aspects, your governance structure, what technology you will be using, how would you basically take the network will be growing, scaling that network, right? And then what kind of investment models that you would have in place, like net present value, internal rate of return, the payback period, the cost benefit analysis, and all of those things, right? So you have to think along the lines, all of those, when you think of the investment for the blockchain. This is the aspect for the risk framework. When you talk about the risk is not associated with the technology. Risk is more associated with your business side, with the governance that you have in place, and then how do you quantify these transactions that happen, and how do I monetize on them. So there's a big risk involved in those kind of things. But here is the simple way to look at. First, you identified the best use case that would fit into the terms that we called multi-party transaction, looking for trust and transparency. That's the best use case. So find the use case that works for your business. That's the first thing. Then you create the business blueprint, that what kind of business value you want to achieve from that. And then you decide what technology you will use to make that business outcome. And then how do you integrate that with your existing systems and applications, right? For example, people say that I can't put all the information on blockchain because now everyone can see. But we say you don't have to put every information on blockchain. So I think that's one of the aspects. How do you integrate your systems, existing systems, with blockchain networks, right? People might be thinking that if I need to put a transaction on blockchain, do I put name, address, all the other information with that transaction? Probably not. You can do hash of that information, which is basically a cryptographic thing, and you put that thing associated with your transaction. So they can see hash, but they can't read. Right? They cannot see your name, address, other things, because it's a hash. But it's still, you can find out if that transaction is right or not, because you can compare the hash with the actuals. So let's say if in your profile tomorrow your driver license number changes, hash will not be matching that is on the record. So record has to be updated with that. So that's how you do this thing differently. So you can do those things, but that's how you start with the project. There are multiple use cases that IBM has already worked through. These are the big solutions or business network based solutions that we talk about. Trade lens. The example I gave you earlier was primarily the trade lens. So I talked to the Maersk and their CIO team in April 2016, and that's how we built the trade lens early on. It's basically a digital supply chain, nothing else. Removing those 127 documents into one document, very simple use case. So think that in mind. So that's how we said that if a container moved from port A to port B, there's $100 of the cost involved in these documents. Can we eliminate them and do it in $10? That's the use case for the trade lens. Food trust, we talked about that. If an apple comes from one place, how can you make sure it's coming from the right place? So we are working with Walmart in terms of avocados coming from Brazil or Mexico. How do we ensure those are organic or not? Because in US there are 2 times more number of the produce who are not organic and sold as organic labeled. That's the problem we are fighting with, because people are paying double the money for organic food, but there's not enough organic food coming in. So how are you selling organic food more than it's coming in? So that's the problem we are fighting with the food trust. How can we ensure that it's organic food, right? We can label that organic, doesn't mean it's organic, right? So we have to track that all the way from the farm, and who is touching them, is someone changing them in between or not. So I think that's the aspect. Worldwire. Many people like us who live across the world, and then we transfer money to our family in other places, right? Money wire transfer and other things. It goes through multiple banks. Imagine that can be done faster and with limited number of parties involved in between. That's the use case for Worldwire. The VTrade, there's a trade finance platform where you can say how the post-trade settlements happen, and we can do them faster with blockchain without going through multiple, like 3 weeks, 2 weeks, and those kind of times they can be done faster, right? We have about 100 plus active business networks running as of now on blockchain. So blockchain is not a technology that's still in infancy. It has been used by real business use cases. You can see some of the names of companies and different type of use cases: bank guarantees, payments, trade finance, identity, insurance, healthcare, all of those, right? So one of the things I would share with you is the identity one, which I think everyone understand. That how many of you believe that I should own my identity, and I should have full control over my identity, and I should tell who am I, not the bank or passport agency or driver agency or somebody else? Okay, that's very, because I think we all think that should be the case, right? Imagine the guy who is at the border, who is a refugee trying to get in a country, and he says, who am I? And nobody is believing him that who is that person, and that guy is at mercy of, he can't go anywhere, right? But if there would be some way that if he says who he is, I can make a record of him, but now he cannot be changed. He cannot change tomorrow from this person to the other person, but he has said he was he, I will track him that way. But that should be the way. But how we as individuals, because our identity currently not owned by one entity, right? No one, you still have Aadhaar, you can say government has one identity, that's the one, but now in today's environment it has multiple other entities as well, because with Aadhaar you can fly outside, right? If Aadhaar would allow you one day, probably that's one identity, but there's no one identity entity as of now. But we would like to have control of our identity. So we are marching towards this concept called self-sovereign identity, which means individuals should have control, access of our identity attributes and information. If I say who am I, you should believe it. And I can provide the credentials from these parties, but they should not be defining who am I. So that's the basic fundamental difference in thinking the self-sovereign identity. And the reason I'm saying is that we have evolved so far. Earlier, there has been the business's centralized identity management systems, that everyone was saying that I will manage, you guys come fill this form, I will keep in my system, you don't see what am I doing with your information, right? That's what happened when you go to bank. You fill a form, they do take all the information from you, and you don't know what they are doing with your information. Do you know what they are doing with that? They don't, you don't, right? So that's one of the things. Other thing is that we see is that when we go to these the other places in terms of your identity, how you would be seeing that decentralized manner. So we have moved from centralized to user-centric model. User-centric is one that I talked about earlier, that you can create your own profiles. So users control at least that aspect, that I can create my Facebook, WhatsApp account and those things. It's my ability to do that. So at least they are giving you that access, right? You can create even your user profile to access your account on your bank account, right? So those are the other things you can do. So there are some things that are advanced from centralized identity to the user-centric identity, but we are still far behind than this self-sovereign identity. And the reason I mentioned it's very important use case, if we live in one day in civilized society, trusted society, probably we can have a blockchain based identity and everyone will know it, and we don't have to show all these things that we carry in our purse and wallets every day, right? So that's basically is one of the most important use case. When banks do know your customer, they always spend 2,000-3,000 rupees or $100 on every person. If I have been identified once, if you know who am I, why every bank is doing the same thing? Simple, right? So those are the kind of things that we can eliminate with blockchain. I can keep on going with so many different business and industry use cases, but I hope you found this interesting and you can think and spark your thoughts. Probably you can come up with some ideas, use this technology in different industry use cases, but it gives you a perspective how businesses can think with blockchain, right? One other thing you should take as a takeaway, that blockchain can give you more value if you think blockchain as a team sport, right? Don't try to create like founder-led network and nobody joining your network, right? That would be a problem too. I have seen many consortiums also built that, yes, we are 3 companies, let's build that, and consortium is not growing anymore, right? 5 banks came together, they are still at 5 banks, no users, other things. So think of blockchain as team sport, which means you have to think about other parties who are part of blockchain. What's the value for them? How can you bring value for them and motivate them to be part of your network? And then where you have multi-party transaction looking for trust and transparency, that's your use case. I think those are the 2 important things that you should keep in mind. Okay? With that, I think I talked about the book. You can download the book first, I think 3 or 4 chapters for free with this thing that you have in there. You can read about, and if you like it, you can write about your reviews. If you don't like, still write about your reviews because we can improve further, because yeah, that's it. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you. Question, sorry, yeah. Sorry, it's hard to hear you, so can you please repeat the question again? How the resources will be worked in the peer-to-peer network? Terrorist funding. Yeah, I think that's one of the case that very good example why we haven't seen the peer-to-peer as much proliferating that use case into the peer-to-peer network. One of the things that I personally think how it can be used, because when you think about any business network, even if it's peer-to-peer network, how do you bring those parties onto the network? So remember, I think we talked about the 3 important things. Membership of the network is one of the most important aspects. If you bring terrorists onto the network, I can't help, one of the things, right? But if you bring the right parties, I can make sure that party remains the right one and going through the same transaction, I can identify them effectively. So I think that's one of the challenge that we have with the the technology in terms of not the technology issue, but it's the issue that we deal with today. You know, in computer science, we call garbage in, garbage out. So that applies to everything. You talk about artificial intelligence, you talk about blockchain or any technology in the world. If you are bringing wrong information, wrong people to a network, you will see the wrong results and wrong outcome. So you have to vet those people who come to your network before you let them enter in your network, right? And then you can enable to, although there are techniques that how can you do, you can validate your peers and you can identify those peers, and once they have identified, you have actually hold accountable for those people what they have done in the network. But you can transpose them or expose them if they have done something wrong.
So they can create their own network, no sir?
They can create own network.
Their own network, and they can transfer the funds.
That's one of the things. So you mentioned, I think one of the important thing I mentioned about the governance and regulations and interoperability, why the governments are not allowing these things is one of these concerns, yes, right, that you just mentioned. Why even global currency or peer-to-peer networks are not enabled because of those issues. Because we cannot have these kind of networks coming by default and using this technology. They are anyways doing now. Without having, even with having banks, they are doing now. They can do it with technology, that's different thing. People asked me 2 weeks back, I was in Colombia, I was talking about artificial intelligence, and that was a different topic. They were talking about, will there be robots that will be taking more of the charge than human beings? Will you let them happen? It's all about how you use the technology and how you enable the technology, how you govern the technology. When I talk about governance, it's not governance by the business, governance by the government too, and the people and community and everybody as part of that. So if you allow those kind of peer-to-peer networks and that can sustain, obviously terrorists will do that. Same thing in the security, cyber security we talk about. There are dark webs, people are still doing that. So it's everywhere. So all technologies, I think we live with some of the basic facts. We can change them. But there's an opportunity for us to do something different, and that's where I think we see blockchain will be able to help. If we alleviate some of those challenges, if we see the transaction is very trusted and transparent, everyone can have the visibility to them, then probably I think we would not see those things that are, the money is going where, we can track that effectively. But hopefully if it's going through bank, using blockchain, I can find if it's going to terrorist or not, right? I don't know, I have answered your question, but it's difficult here. Any other questions? Yes.
Sir, there is always debate about decentralized and centralized blockchain platform.
Mm-hmm.
But if we talk about the currency, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, it's generally considered it is centralized. Like they can change. What is your opinion?
Right. So I think that's one of the area that has been debatable in the sense. Centralized in the currencies that have been built is one, but the decentralized nature there is how do you mine that currency? There's a difference, right? So if I say I have the Bitcoin platform, but who is mining that if I post particular transaction there? So there will be mining, miners can be anybody, I can be miner, right? So in that case, some capabilities are decentralized in that. Although you can determine that I have posted it's the Bitcoin related network, but in that network you have open things, anybody can mine, right? So that's one aspect you have to keep different. And then if you are building your own network, then you can determine how would you do that, right? Centralized or decentralized or hybrid, depending on your business use case. But in cryptocurrency case, that's how it is as of now. Other questions? You got the blockchain for business beyond Bitcoin? Yeah? Okay. Very good.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Most of these guys, they are like studying data science and AI.
Mm-hmm.
Where blockchain is marrying AI and data science?
Very good question, right? So in AI, going back to my first thing, garbage in, garbage out. Understand that? what's the importance of data in AI? Is AI without IA? When I say IA is information architecture, which means your data. Without IA, no AI. Keep that in mind. Without IA, there is no AI. And when you say IA is information architecture, which means your data, how do you use the data, what data it is, how do you ingest it, how do you cleanse that data. So that's the important aspect in general. What I talk about is the trusted AI. I'll give you a very simple example. We use AI in our day-to-day uses, primarily consumer-centric use cases, interfaces you like voice interface. I can call Alexa, I can call Google, do things, right? Those are very predominant use cases which are consumer-based. Imagine if I use this consumer-based application to a hospital. I'm an oncologist, a cancer specialist. I go to home after my duty and nurse calls me from the hospital, hey, there's a patient here, he needs to get his chemotherapy, can you prescribe the dose, how much should I give him? Doctor says 25 ml. Somebody fiddled with your voice sample, it's coming to 250 ml to the nurse. Nurse gives the patient 250 ml of the chemotherapy. What happens to the patient? Yeah. So what happens to that? That was the data. The voice sample is your data, right? Very, very important where it comes, who changed it, where it comes from. So the data security, data provenance is the most important thing in this case. So trust in the data. When you are trying to bring trust in your data lifecycle, blockchain can help you. Trust in data lifecycle in your AI environment, blockchain can help you. So look for that perspective, and you need to know who touched the data when. You keep that record of that. I'm not saying that you keep all the data on blockchain. Blockchain is not a big data solution. Just keep that in mind. Only you are trying to bring trust and transparency in some transactions. Put that information on blockchain, not everything. Only those touch points, right? So I don't want all the information that you have about your records, your name, address, phone number, money. I don't need any of that. If this guy did this, just put that. A did B, that's it. Simple. So I think when you look for the trust in the data provenance, blockchain can help in the AI from that perspective. So that's the use case that I see for blockchain, and I think we have been talking about trusted AI, where you can have the trust across the data lifecycle. When you guys build data sets, data scientists are writing the different data sets, writing different algorithms, making different models, AI models, right? As you write, will there be an application that's using only your model? Probably not. There will be an application using multiple models. Models would have come from multiple data scientists. Multiple data scientists would have had multiple data sets originated from multiple different systems and applications. How do you track those different things from different places? And I'm using an AI application. I can't keep track of everything, where it's going, who is doing what. How do I trust this application that all the data is right, nothing has been fiddled with, right? So if you are looking for that kind of environment, blockchain helps. That's the trusted AI environment where you can trust where the data is coming from, where the model is coming from, which model is being used in which application. So you keep only the tracks of those touch points. And that's where blockchain is used in the trusted AI environment.
So these guys can really keep the track of all the models which is coming from where.
Yeah.
And if some model really start behaving erratically, they can really go back
Absolutely.
who actually
Right.
created that model or who has fiddled that
Exactly.
model.
That's right.
Fantastic. I have another question for
Sure.
you. So,
There's one guy also
Yeah.
has to say like that.
Sir, how blockchain helps in energy sector?
Energy sector, yes. So you know that distribution of energy, you understand that?
Yes.
Okay. So in the distribution of energy, and then now the new emerging patterns of energy, that you can have solar energy in your house, you can have some other, right, other energies as well. So how do you manage the credits for these energy, different types of energies? That's one problem that we have. You say that I have gotten 100 kilowatts from solar and only got 10. There are sometimes disputes in that, right? When you do the electricity distribution, I think the distribution rights and the distribution rights management, those are the other places that, so I think when you have these patterns where you would see an opportunity for disputes, we use blockchain for that. I'll give you an example. In IBM, the first use case that we did was, we call it, it's primarily for dispute resolution, but I'll explain. IBM has a business called IBM Global Financing, which is a $40 billion business. What they do is, let's say, a company who wants to buy hardware, software, and services. They don't have enough money, so they take loan from somebody. This is the company which gives loan, IBM Global Financing. There are 10 parties involved in that transaction. One says, I'll deliver hardware, I'll deliver software, I'll do these kind of services. But as these kind of things are built and delivered, one of the guys say, I haven't delivered the service yet, but global financing team already paid him. And this guy who is receiving the service, he says, I did not receive the service, how did you pay him? Same thing the other guy would say, they haven't delivered my hardware and you paid them. Other guy says that I have delivered hardware 2 weeks ago and you haven't paid me. So we have 2.1 million invoices that are dispute every year. Almost 100,000 or $100 million stuck in between, money is not released to the right parties at right time. We did simply made an Uber ledger. What I call is Uber ledger, that I'm not trying to have everyone say you replaced your ledgers, get rid of all of your ledgers, use my common ledger. We are not there yet because it will be too long for us to implement. We said, I'll create an Uber ledger. As soon as you deliver the service, just make sure that record is there so I can find it out. So every party is doing that. We have reduced 75% of the disputes in 8 months. So those are the kind of examples that we can use. Your second question.
It's a very interesting use case. I want to really hear more
Sure.
how you actually did that.
Right, so I think this is one of the things. So Lenovo is one of our partners, as you know. They are a hardware partner as one
I
of the,
heard about this whole
Right,
story,
right.
but actually, how did you implement this?
So it's
Uberization of ledger.
organization of the ledger.
Uberization of ledger.
Uberization of ledger. So it's Hyperledger Fabric instance running on one of the IBM systems, just layman terms. Every party has an access to this particular Hyperledger instance. So imagine this is a founder-led network, you can call it. So we created that. Lenovo has specific authority on this network, that they have their third-party vendors who can have access to some specific data information. So it's basically just the records as IGF has access, it's sitting with the IGF team. Everybody has access to this common ledger, right? And Lenovo and other parties do not have to copy their ledger, all of their ledgers onto the blockchain, but only when, let's say, the IGF has a new transaction, which means new transaction means a third party customer, well, it's not third party, a customer who has asked for $1 million as a loan. That's just one transaction. We have that transaction record on blockchain. Now, Lenovo, when they delivers the hardware, they make sure their ledger is putting a record onto this. That's all. They are not putting all the information, are not putting all the details that it was x86 system, this network router gear, nothing. They are putting that this information, I have released this hardware to this customer at this point in time, next person is taking this next action and who is going to receive it and do something with that. So they are just putting those information back from their ledgers to this Hyperledger, which is just keeping
And
the
then the
information.
consensus is automatically happening.
Yes, the consensus happened with that. And then also I think we don't see a dispute in that manner, right? So that's how.
Fantastic.
Other questions? Yes. No legal questions, right? Good. Thank you.
So, what is the difference between distributed and decentralized systems?
I think that word is little bit sometimes confusing, right?
Yeah.
So, when you say the decentralized word, you understand the centralized in the case that all the information at one place, right? And then all the rights are controlled by one place. That's the centralized. If you are talking about the system here or governance here, we have used that term in two places. Decentralized blockchain and decentralized governance, right? So when you make the one, I'm just talking about an example where we make the decision part, which is most important than technology and other things. So how decisions are made by central authority versus it's made by all the people in a decentralized manner. So you would be having consensus coming from all the people. You understand? To make a decision. In distributed nature, it could be that your authority can be distributed to take parts and pieces of that authority. So I'll give you an example. Let's say in the supply chain, if a truck goes from point A to point B in the supply chain, the freight forwarder or the trucking company can take that decision. I don't have to take a decision that how long the truck should take and how it should it be coming in 10, because my specialty is not part of that. I distribute that authority to the other guy and let them take the decision. So you distribute the decision making power across the network. In a decentralized case, you could have the same authority. You have to make the decision, but you are receiving input from everybody in the network.
So basically, in distributed, like you said, the endorsing peers.
Mhm.
So those are the people through which the responsibilities or the consensus is distributed, right?
Right.
So, and in decentralized, everyone is getting the same data, everyone
Yes.
is getting the same information, and everyone in the network has to
Make the
agree
decision.
with it.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Well, very good. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jay sir. It was such a wonderful and informative session. It's such a privilege to have you all here, and I'm sure our students are benefited with it. On behalf of Team Aegis, may I request Bhupesh sir to hand over a token of memento to you.
Thank you very much.
I think it's a great moment of pride for me. Jai is my college junior. We are from the same college. And I was really amazed to see. In college days, I used to be on this stage, and I thought only drama guys can really speak. But you're not a fabulous writer. I've read your book, and all of you should really read this book. It's a fabulous book. And your talk is like cutting through all the craps of the technology, Ethereum, Hyperledger, Corda, and you really put up every piece of business fantastically, fabulous. Wonderful job done. Right. Good job done. Thank you. Thank you so much.